What's going on, class? We are going over advanced editing techniques in Photoshop today. Not necessarily anything new that we're teaching. It's basically just diving a little bit deeper into the tools and types of edits that I've already taught you so far this year. So this is just an effort in giving you guys some exposure and experience into just some more advanced type editing with the same type of tools that we've already learned from, and also to prepare you for your next project where you'll be doing something very similar to what we are going to create together. So the first thing we need to do is we need to go ahead and create a document. We're going to be creating basically a composition of about five other images, where it's going to look something similar to this, right? So very dark, very gloomy, and this we're going to have this effect where this creature or animal, in this case a wolf or a dog, is going to be coming out of the darkness, and our explorer here is stumbling upon them. These are the images that we're going to be using. Obviously, you can see that they're very bright in nature, and we're obviously going to have to do some editing to those images to make them look similar to the darker image down here where you see the explorer with the torch. There are some assets that you need to download, so make sure that you've downloaded the Wolf Edit assets. For whatever reason, I was not able to include the wolf in that. I don't know why, seeing how this is primarily called the Wolf Edit. But nonetheless, you need to make sure that you download this image as well and incorporate that into your assets folder for this project. So jumping back into Photoshop, the first thing again we need to do is to create that document. We'll go ahead and call this Wolf Edit. And our width and height are going to be in pixels. The width is going to be 2,000 pixels. Height is going to be 2,500 pixels. Our resolution is 72, as well as our RGB color, or our color mode is going to be RGB, and we'll leave our background as white. Looking at this, we should be able to tell, because of the low resolution, remember the three magic numbers, 72, 150, and 300. Anytime you're below that 150 mark, you are certainly encroaching on areas where these images are intended for screen devices, whether it is tablets, mobile devices, laptops, those type screens, because we have low resolution. So it's going to be web-based or screen-based, and certainly because of the RGB color, that's light source. So this definitely tells us that this is for a screen or some type of device in that manner. All right, so there we have our parameters. We're going to go ahead and click Create. There's our canvas. And the first thing we're going to go ahead and do is bring in the clouds or the sky that we're going to use for this image. So there's a couple ways that you can do this. If you can go ahead and slide into your assets panel, and then here are those documents. And the file that we need is going to be the Wolf Edit Mountain Sky. So you can either open this in Photoshop. And if you remember the Monkey and Chris Pratt project that we did together, basically you're going to click and drag this over to your thumbnail for the new project. You can drop it, and there it is. But undo that. Or from your Finder window, you can simply click on the image and just drag it on over to your canvas. And again, there it is also. We have the little transform markers there letting us know that we're about to make this bigger or smaller, and we certainly need to do that. So I'm going to go ahead and make sure that we have the constraints locked up in here. So our width and height for our transform toolbar at the top of our screen is locked. If you don't have it locked, you can certainly use this, hold the shift button, and that'll keep the proportionalities constrained. But I kind of like clicking on the lock, so that way I don't have to worry about that. So I'm just going to barely stretch this to where at least it fits it horizontally. And then I'm going to drag this to the top, or drag this down so that the top is at the top. Move that up just a little bit using my arrow keys. And then that looks good. I'm going to click on the check mark or hit enter to accept those settings. And there we go. We have our, for the most part, our first background in this composition. Now, as I said earlier, we're trying to make this dark and gloomy as if we're in a cave. So this is certainly too bright, so we need to bring down the exposure. And we're going to use adjustment layers. So the adjustment layers are located at the bottom of your screen. This is going to be, and I'll go ahead and zoom in so that you guys can see this a little bit better. But that's going to be down here where the circle is half filled in, little drop down arrow. If we click there, we can see that we have lots of different options, right? Solid color, gradient, pattern, brightness, levels, curves, exposure, vibrance, etc. We can also jump into the adjustments panel. If your adjustment panel is not there, remember, go to Window, and then there are all of your panels. There's the adjustments. You can bring that back to life. But what we want to do is make sure that we have the Wolf Edit layer selected. We are going to change this name of the layer to Clouds. And then we'll go ahead and add the levels for that particular layer. And the settings for this layer, basically we want to make it dark. It doesn't have to be exactly as I type it in, but we're going to go ahead and set this at 62. We'll bring this down to 0.62. The 255 we'll leave, and then for the output levels we'll leave at 0 and at 50, and you'll see instantly our layer here will become darkened based on the level. So we're basically bringing down the light, increasing the shadows for this particular layer, making this dark. Okay. All right. So now we're ready to add the second item for this composition, which is going to be the mountain trail. So again, I'm going to jump over into my Finder panel, and I'm looking for the mountain trail, Wolf Edit mountain trail. And I'm just going to click and drag this over to my document again. There it is. My constraints are locked up at the top of my screen, so I know that I can stretch this without worrying about squishing it. And I'm just going to try to fill in this area right about here. And I'm wanting to use just the foreground here. I don't want any of this background. We'll address that later. But for now, we want to use just this foreground here. I'll go ahead and click the check mark or hit enter to accept that. And now we're ready to proceed with the next part of this edit. So again, we don't need the background here. We only need the foreground here. So I'm going to go ahead and grab my quick selection tool, which is the paintbrush quick selection tool. Just to bring attention to that, I'll zoom in so that you can see that a little bit better. So that's the quick selection tool, the paintbrush quick selection tool. And I'm going to go ahead and paint in my selection. And Photoshop does an amazing job at grabbing those pixels that I want. If I need to adjust, for example, maybe I grabbed too much of that image, I can hold down the Alt key on Windows, and I can go ahead and subtract from that selection. There we go. And we can always make adjustments later, but that seems to be good right about there. And from this selection, we want to make a layer mask. And if you remember from previous lessons, the layer mask lives at the bottom of our layers panel. It's the square with the circle. That's your layer mask. So from a selection, we can click on that layer mask, and then it will mask out everything that is not selected. And this is perfect. This is exactly what we want. We want that background to disappear with that mask. Now, again, this is way too bright, so we need to bring down those levels. So this is kind of one of those wash, rinse, repeat type activities. So we've already added levels and decreased the exposure, if you will, for the clouds level. We're going to do the same thing for the Wolf Edit mountain trail. In fact, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and rename that. So we'll rename that mountains. And then we'll go ahead and add an adjustment. Again, levels. And for these levels, we're going to change. We'll leave that at 0. The next setting we'll leave at 0.57. And then 210. And then for the output levels, we'll leave at 0 and then 35. And that looks to be good right there. All right, now, again, as we learned from previous lessons, if you remember the beach exercise where we had the beach ball and the dog, and there was a picture of an ocean along with the letters beach, and I think there was also some beach buildings that were real colorful. We did clipping masks, we did adjustment layers. So if you need to, you can go back and re-watch that lesson. But in short, clipping masks allows us to tell adjustment layers to only affect the layer directly below it. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and right-click over here in this gray area on the Levels 2 layer. I'm going to right-click, and then I'm going to click on Create Clipping Mask. And now I'll see this little arrow that's pointing down. Go ahead and zoom in on that for you. I'll see this little arrow that's pointing down. That's telling me that this is a clipping mask. and it's only allowing this adjustment layer to affect the layer directly below it. All right, and you can see that this obviously brings in more of the detail of the clouds level. All right, moving on. Time to bring in the wolf. So again, we're gonna, same process, right? We're gonna go back into our assets folder. Here's that image that you should have downloaded separate from the assets folder. Again, we're gonna click, drag that asset or that image over into Photoshop. Now with this one, I need to zoom out because we're gonna make this wolf really, really big. So again, my constraints are already locked, so I don't have to worry about that. I'm gonna click and drag this guy and try to fill him in the canvas as much as possible. So I want just a little bit of space above the ears, a little bit of space below his paws, and just a little bit of space to his backside here. I think that should do it right about there. I'm going to hit enter or the check mark to accept it. Control 0 to zoom in, Control minus to back out just a little bit. And there we go. We've filled in this area. The wolf is looking quite large in this composition. Now, we obviously don't want the background or even the foreground. We just want our subject matter, which in this case is the wolf. So, Photoshop has some amazing artificial intelligence built into it, into all of its softwares, whether it's Photoshop, InDesign, Illustrator, you have it. It allows us to select specific elements inside of an image. So it knows that if I want to select the subject matter, it will look at contrasting pixels, and I imagine there's some learning that's going on with the software as far as picking out subject matters. So in this case, I have the wolf edit wolf 1 layer selected. I am going to change that name, so double clicking, and I'm going to change this to wolf. And then with the wolf layer selected, I'm going to go ahead and click on select. Excuse me. Select and then subject. And it's just that easy. You'll see that all of a sudden our wolf has been selected. Okay. Now we want to mask or create a mask based on this selection. So we have our selection here. We're going to go ahead and click again on our layer mask. It's going to mask out all of that background. You will see that there are some highlights that have been included in this, so we can certainly come in here and kind of do some adjusting. So whether you're doing that with your eraser tool or your brush tool, if you're using the eraser tool, you'll want to make sure that you use the foreground color white. Otherwise, black will do the opposite of what you want to do. So if you're using the eraser tool, shortcut E, use foreground white, and now you can erase away the parts that you don't want. If you're using the brush tool, you'll want to use black because black conceals. That will allow you to erase the areas that you don't want. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and use the eraser tool. Foreground is set to white. I'm going to zoom in just a little bit here, and I can see areas that I don't want, such as parts of his whisker. I can also see that some of the edges here are quite rough. So if I right-click, I can, reduce the softness of this brush. I don't want to be too hard because it's just too sharp of an edge, but somewhere around 50% will do. And now I can come in here and just kind of clean up these edges just a little bit. So really what I'm looking for is to get rid of the outline that's going to show up, as well as any highlights that might make this image not look too good. So for example, around the ears, there's just too much light hitting the back of these ears that are really making this image look not too real. So especially when we go to darken this. So kind of just getting rid of some of that harsh light that's hitting the back of this wolf. Again, just kind of cleaning up the image. Less is more. Try not to do too much editing here because as you continue to do too much editing, it's just going to make it look fake. Excuse me. So that looks pretty good. You can always come back and make adjustments later. Inside the legs, you can see where there's kind of light shining through the back, so we can kind of clean that up just a little bit. Just kind of trying to soften that light up so it doesn't look too obvious. Again, you can use your brackets on your keypad as well as zooming in to help you get into those areas. All right, looking pretty good. If there's any ground here that's been left over, go ahead and certainly get rid of that. Again, just clean that image up as much as you can. And remember, we can always go the opposite way. If for some reason you cut too much off, you can always bring back in more of that image. It's just a mask. This is a non-destructive edit. All right, looking pretty good. All right, and then once again, way too light, right? So we need to go ahead and bring in that other adjustment layer. So we're going to add an adjustment layer to the wolf layer. Add that levels, just like we did before. This time the settings are going to be, we'll leave that, the first one at 34 because we have a lot of brightness in this particular layer. So we're going to bring that to 34. The next setting is going to be 1.3, and then we'll leave that at 255. And then for our output levels, we'll leave it at 0, and then 110 seems to do a really good job. Now again, once again, you'll see that that adjustment layer has affected all of the layers underneath it. So we definitely need to make sure that we add a clipping mask so that way it only affects the wolf, and then instantly you'll see it brings back in everything else from the image. So everything looks to be really matchy-matchy. We had 3 images that were very bright. Now we've brought those the intensity of that exposure down, so everything looks really dark and gloomy. We're obviously going to be doing a lot more to this, but this concludes the day 1 of this lab and lecture, and then we will pick up where we left off tomorrow.